What is up, guys? In today's video we're going to be installing the BBR 120cc big bore kit on my son's XR100. This is going to be a step-by-step video going over how to install everything that comes in this kit, including the valve springs, the retainers, and the rocker arms. So let's go ahead and flip the camera around and get into it.
Here is a look at my son's XR100. This is a 2001 model year. We got this bike for him kind of as a project bike for him and I to work on together. Does already have a full FMF exhaust on it from the previous owner. I do like that the previous owner kept the OEM heat shield on here. I don't like that they stripped all the paint off and left it rusty. Definitely has some Mad Max vibes going on. We will remove that later on and paint it. We have done some little upgrades like breakaway levers, both for the clutch and for the brake. It does have Renthal bars on it. And we did put some wider aluminum foot pegs on there for him. And I put a Tusk shifter on there. So just little things for now. Here is a look at his 2013 CRF100. We will be racing these bikes. They are basically identical, just different plastics. The XR and CRF100 are the same bike. His 2013 CRF is completely bone stock, has the stock pipe on it. So this will be a good baseline bike when we run it to get a number. And we will compare it to the XR100 after we have the big bore kit on it, and we'll see just how much faster the big bore kit is compared to a stock bike. I'm going to start by removing the two 10mm nuts for the seat, and I'm going to turn off the gas and remove the fuel line to the carburetor here. I have already undone the two 8mm bolts for the gas tank, so we'll remove that and set it aside. Now I can undo the throttle cable. We'll just set that over here for now and undo our spark plug wire. Going to break loose the two 10mm nuts for the carburetor. We'll get those fully unthreaded, and then we will set those aside. Now I can use a Phillips to undo the clamp for the airbox. Now we can go ahead and remove our carburetor. I'll take this over to the bench so we can install bigger jets. To access the jets, I'm just going to undo the three Phillips head screws that hold on the bowl. BBR does recommend a 110 for the main jet and a 40 for the pilot if your bike has a pipe and the 120cc big bore kit. This bike already has a full FMF exhaust, so we will do the 110 and the 40 for the pilot. The bike did already have three holes drilled in the airbox for extra airflow. The previous owner must have already done this when they installed the FMF exhaust. Funnily enough, they did not jet the bike. As you'll see here in a second, I pull a stock main jet out of there, so don't know why they would do the pipe and the airbox but not do the jets. But you should do these if you're installing this kit. If you're worried about dust and debris getting in your airbox, BBR does sell these little pre-filters that go in those holes, so those are nice to have. My bike already has the BBR CDI box on it as well, so we don't need to worry about that. If your bike doesn't have any of those things, I just recommend getting the full kit from BBR. They sell this with the exhaust and the CDI box and everything you'll need. And they sell it in different stages as well if your bike already has a pipe. So you'll just want to, get the right kit for the mods that your bike already has. Like I said, if your bike doesn't have anything, go ahead and just buy the kit that has everything you'll need to get the most out of this kit. There's no point in really installing it if you're not going to get the most power that you can out of the kit. I'm going to finish removing the screws for the bowl. So we'll get those removed. Now we can access our jets. Just a flathead to remove both the main and the pilot. Here's a look at our main jet we pulled out of there. You can see it's a stock 98, so they never jetted this bike. And here is a look at our 110 main jet that we will be installing. So we'll get that threaded in here, and then we'll just give it a little snug down with the Phillips head there. Doesn't have to be super tight or anything. Now we can remove our pilot jet. So we'll unthread that. And there's a look at our stock pilot jet as well. And we are going to be installing a 40 for our pilot. We'll get that installed as well. And then just snug it down. These don't need to be super tight or anything. You can strip them out pretty easy. We'll reinstall our bowl and the 3 Phillips head screws for it. And we'll just snug those down. And now the bike is properly jetted for this kit. Moving on to the intake boot here. Just going to remove the 2 8mm bolts that hold it on. So we'll get those unthreaded and we'll set that aside. I'm going to remove the spark plug next. This will make it easier to set the engine to top dead center. Now I can remove the 2 10mm bolts for the valve cover. So I'll just get both of those unthreaded. Now we can just remove those. These bolts do have rubber seals on them as well. Now we can go ahead and remove our valve cover, set that aside, and I'm going to undo the 2 10mm nuts for the exhaust mount. So we'll get both of them done from the front, and then we will remove the rear number plate. There's 1 bolt that holds the rear number plate on, and then there's 2 rubber grommets as well. There's little tabs on the back of the number plates right there, and they slide into rubber grommets right there and there. With the number plate removed, we can access the 2 12mm bolts for the rear exhaust mount. So we'll get both of those unthreaded. And last but not least, we can do this middle mount for the exhaust. I like to remove this one last. Just makes it easier to remove the exhaust this way. So we'll remove that, set it aside for now, and we'll go to the stator side and remove all these 8mm bolts for our stator cover. We're going to leave those bolts inside the stator cover, and flipping it over, our gasket is still good, so we'll set that aside. Now we can set our engine to top dead center. There's a look at our timing mark on the cam gear there, and I'll freeze the picture here. You can see there is a notch on the case, and then there is a line with a T on it on the flywheel for top dead center. Line those up, and then there's our dot up there at 12 on the cam gear. That's how you know you're at top dead center. I'm going to remove the 10mm bolt for the cam plate and adjust this so we have slack in the cam chain, and undo the cam chain tensioner at the bottom. Now we can remove the 2 10mm bolts for our cam gear. You do have to turn it to access both of these bolts. You can't leave it in time. It does kind of make it a little hard to put it back together, but I'll show you how to do that later on in the video. So we'll set it back to top dead center there. Now we can go ahead and remove our cam gear. This just pops right off of the camshaft. And then we can remove our cam gear, and I'm going to hang the chain up here for now. You don't need to tie this out of the way. You can just drop it down, but this works pretty good to keep the cam chain up and out of the way. So we can remove the 4 12mm bolts for the rocker arms. I'm going to remove these in a crisscross pattern to break the torque evenly. Going to continue in that crisscross pattern until all four of those are broken loose. Once you have all four of them broken loose, we'll go ahead and remove the four nuts, and there's four washers underneath of them as well. So we'll grab all of those and set them aside. Now we can remove our rocker arm assembly. We'll put that aside, and we can remove our camshaft. So we'll pop that out. Here's a look at our stock cam. We won't be using that again. And now I can undo this 10mm bolt for the side of the cylinder head. This one's pretty long, it goes all the way down. So we'll get that out of the way. Next, I can remove the cam chain adjuster. This goes through the cam chain guide, and you have to remove it before you can the cylinder head. That out of the way, we can go ahead and drop the cam chain down and remove the cylinder head. At this point, I thought I could still do the top end with the engine on the frame. Turns out you can not do that. As you'll see here, it's just a little too tight of an area. You cannot get the cylinder head off. So to do this job, you do have to remove the engine off the frame. So back on the cylinder head goes, and I'm going to start removing the engine off of the bike. To do that, I'm going to start by removing the chain. So there's two 10mm bolts for the sprocket. Pop that off and get that out of the way. So I'll just grab that and set it aside. Going over to the clutch side, I'm going to use a 14mm wrench and a 12mm wrench to undo the adjusting nuts for the clutch cable. Back those out all the way so you can get as much adjustment as you need. I actually had to go up top as well and undo the clutch cable from the clutch lever. And after I did that, I had more than enough slack to undo the clutch cable. So I'll go ahead and leave that there for now. Now I can undo the PCV valve line, set that aside, and I'm going to start undoing this bottom engine mount. Just a 12mm ratchet on this side, and then I have a 12mm wrench on the other side to stop the bolt from spinning. So we'll take that out. Then I'm going to loosen up this middle mount. On this bike, it was just two 12mm nuts. So I'm going to leave those loose. Now I can undo this front engine mount. This is just two plates, and they kind of sandwich together to make the front engine mount. I'm going to try and get this other side of the mount out with all the bolts in it still, and I'll just kind of leave all those bolts inside that mount left in place so I know where they all go. So that'll come out with all the bolts in it. Unplug the stator. It's just two wires to unplug the stator. Last but not least, I can remove that middle engine mount that was supporting it, and it should drop out at this point, but mine was actually kind of hung up on that bottom engine mount. The two ears were kind of bent in, and it was grabbing on the engine, but after I struggled with it for a little bit and a little persuasion, I was able to get it off the bike and onto the bench, and we can pick up where we left off. Remove the valve cover. Now I can remove our cylinder head. So we'll just slide that up and off of those four studs. We'll set our cylinder head aside for now. Now I can remove the cylinder. I am going to unthread the cam chain tensioner down here, and I'll set it aside for now, and we'll thread that onto our new cylinder. Now I can remove the old cylinder. We'll just slide this up and off those four studs as well. Give it a few wiggles so it doesn't get hung up on the piston, and it'll just pop right off. There's a look at our old cylinder. We'll set that aside. Now I can remove one of the circlips for the wrist pin. You should definitely have a rag or some type of paper towel stuffed down into the crankcase, especially when you're removing or installing these circlips. They are notorious for flying off and potentially getting down into the crankcase. I always do this, but I did get a little ahead of myself here. And as you'll see, I'll slow down the video. That circlip does actually fly off there. Now, it didn't go down into the crankcase or anything, but it was a close call for sure. Was able to find the circlip. It flew off and fell on the floor, but just a reminder that you should have something down in there. All right, with that, I can go ahead and remove the wrist pin. Just going to give it a few taps from the other side, and it'll start sliding out here. You'll see there it goes, starts to move, and a few more taps, and it'll start working its way out, just like that. Now I can grab it with a pair of pliers, and out comes the wrist pin and the piston. Going to clean up our base gasket surface. I did stuff some rags down in the crankcase for this to stop any dirt or debris from getting down in there. Here's our new cleaned up surface. Like all gasket surfaces, you want to make sure they're nice and clean and prepped for your new gaskets. That way they have a good seal and don't leak. All right, before we install our piston rings, we are going to check the piston ring gap. So BBR recommends the ring end gap to be 0.012 to 0.015. So we'll go ahead and check and make sure they're within spec. To do that, you're just going to install the piston ring into the cylinder. I'm installing it with that letter facing towards me. This is how they will go on the piston as well. So I'm just going to install it into the cylinder the way it would sit on the piston. And then we can square it up in the cylinder using the piston to make sure it's evenly seated in there all the way around. You can use a feeler gauge. This one's 0.012. And you just want to insert it in between that gap there and just double check to make sure it's not too tight or too loose. Should be able to insert it easily but feel a little bit of drag. This one feels absolutely perfect. So we'll go ahead and remove that and we'll install our second ring here. So we'll insert that into the cylinder same way we did the first ring, just like that. Use our piston to square it up, make sure it's evenly seated, and then we will go ahead and check its end gap as well. So just go ahead and insert our feeler gauge into this gap, and this one feels absolutely perfect as well. Just a little bit of tension on that, but inserts easily, so they are perfect. So with that double checked, we can go ahead and install our piston rings. I'm going to start with the oil control ring. This one is corrugated, and I'm going to make sure that gap there is over by that wrist pin hole. Now I can install the bottom oil ring rail. So we'll get this popped on. So it goes on the same ring land as that oil control ring, but it rides on the very bottom of that ring. So we'll just get this popped into that little groove there, and we'll make sure that it can spin freely as well and nothing's getting binded up on it or anything. So I've got a gap on this side, and then I'm going to turn the piston to the opposite piston skirt and install this upper oil ring rail. So this gap will be on this side of the piston. So we'll pop it into the top there. So we have a gap on this side here. And then if we turn it all the way around, we have a gap there and then one over by that wrist pin hole. Now we can install our compression rings. This one is solid black. and the top ring has a chrome edge to it. So if you look at them, you can see one solid black and one has a chrome edge to it. So the solid black ring here goes on the second ring land. When you install it, you want to make sure those numbers and that letter R are facing up to you where you can read it. If you look closely, it says 2R for a second ring, indicating that it goes on the second ring land. So we'll get this one popped on and into its little groove there. Now we can install our top ring. Again, if you look closely at this one, it just has a letter R there for the first ring, indicating that it goes on this top ring land. So we'll get that slid on as well and popped into its little groove just like that. And now we will double check our ring gaps here, make sure that they're 180 degrees apart from one another. Now these are bound to move before you install the piston, so we will double check them before we install it into the cylinder. Now I can install a piston circlip here. I like to get this one done on the bench. So I'm just going to use my thumbs to collapse that circlip down into the hole. And the edge of it is sticking out a little bit. So I'm going to use my needle nose pliers to catch the edge of that circlip and collapse it further down into the hole there. So it actually went past its little groove a little bit. So I'm going to use a tiny screwdriver to push it back towards its little groove. I just felt it snap in there. So here's a better look. You can see the circlip is seated in that groove all the way around. That can go ahead and install some fresh engine oil into our new cylinder. This will just help with installing the piston, and it'll also help protect the cylinder walls and piston on the initial startup and for the break-in period. So we'll do a good bit of oil on our piston rings as well. Make sure those are nicely lubricated. Again, those rings are bound to move, so we will reset our gaps here and make sure that they're 180 degrees apart from one another. So get our ring gaps set. This is how they should look like that when you install it into the cylinder. There's also a larger valve relief there for the intake side. I'll grab the cylinder head here, show you what I'm talking about. The intake valve is larger than the exhaust valve. So when we install our piston, we're going to install it with that bigger valve relief facing towards the intake valve. There's no arrows for this piston, so that's how we're going to install it. We can just install our piston into our cylinder. I'm going to install it on the bench like this. Just makes it a little easier to control our piston ring gaps. So this will allow us to ensure that we, install them exactly where we have them set. So it gives you quite a bit more control than trying to slide the cylinder on over the piston when it's on the bike. So we'll just collapse these rings slowly but surely, working our way around here. And you can see it's already past the second ring there, and it's sliding all the way into the cylinder bore. Actually slid a little bit too far past, so going to bring it up and double check to make sure I can fit the wrist pin in there. Needs to come up a little bit more and can almost fit the wrist pin in, so we'll pull it up just a little tiny bit more. We don't want to pull it past the rings, but we do want to be able to install this wrist pin here. So we'll get that inserted into the piston just like that. And then I can actually push it down a little bit more until it seats up against there. So that'll give us just enough room to slide our wrist pin on. Now we can install our new base gasket, slide the cam chain through, and we'll get this seated all the way down, nice and even. Now we can go ahead and install our cylinder and our piston. We'll get that attached to our connecting rod on the crankshaft. So we'll just slide our wrist pin on. We'll lubricate this as well with engine oil. Now we can just slide it right through the piston and the connecting rod. I'm going to go around to the other side so I can actually see what I'm doing here. From this side, I can see where the wrist pin is, and I can just slide it right through the crankshaft, get everything lined up there. Now we can install some paper towels into the crankcase, and we can install this second circlip. So we'll get it collapsed into the bore and then just use a little screwdriver there to make sure that it's all the way seated into that little groove. So that's good. We can remove our paper towels now. And before we install our cylinder, we are going to install our cam chain guide. There's a little spring that gets hooked on to the cylinder. And as you've seen, the cam chain guide actually comes on and off with the cylinder. So we'll get this slid down into our new cylinder. That rod gets pushed up through that hole there. You'll see it come up there just like that. And then there is a spring that hooks onto the cylinder as well. So I use just a little hook there to get that hooked onto our new cylinder. And now we can slide our new cylinder down. So we'll get this pushed on here and we'll work our cam chain through. And we'll use that hook tool there to make it easier to grab the cam chain. And now I can start sliding the cylinder down. So it just slides right down just like that. Give it a couple more wiggles here. And I'll also switch to the side view so you can see it seating all the way around the gasket there. So we'll finish sliding this down, and that's what we're looking for. A nice even seal all the way around the base gasket. So that looks great there. With that, we can go ahead and install our other cam chain guide. So we'll slide this down through the cylinder. There's an arm at the top of the cam chain guide that rests in a notch at the top of the cylinder. Here's a better look at it. So you can see that little arm there that rests in that notch in the cylinder. And this is how it should look. Everything looks good, and our cam chain is still hooked at the bottom there. So we're ready to move on to the cylinder head. This BBR kit does come with new valve springs and retainers. So we're going to remove the old ones. And to do that, just use a socket, appropriate diameter and extension, and just smack it with a hammer, just like this. Good smack, and the little clips will come undone, and you can remove the springs and retainers. Also going to replace the valve seals as well. The kit does not come with these, but I ordered some because I knew I was going to be in here. These weren't leaking or bad or anything like that, but I figured since I was going to be in here, I might as well replace them. So lubricate the new valve seals with some fresh engine oil, and then we'll pop both of those on. So these just slide on just like that. Now those are both good. Here's a look at our cylinder head with the valves removed. You can see this exhaust valve here is pretty rough. Definitely has a lot of carbon built up on it. And if you look at that exhaust valve seat compared to the intake valve, intake valve is nice and clean. So we are going to clean up that exhaust valve seat. I'm going to use some valve grinding compound. You can pick this up at Advanced Auto Parts or AutoZone. Any place like that will sell it. And it comes with a plunger tool as well. I'm just going to use a drill on the back of the valve instead of that plunger tool. It's quicker and easier to do it this way, but like I said, it will come with a tool if you don't have a drill. Here is a look at our cleaned up exhaust valve seat, and you can see just how much better that looks. It's going to seal up so much nicer. I did pour some gas down in the exhaust valve and it sealed up perfect, so good to go there. To install our new springs and retainers, I cut up a socket like this so I can press down on the spring there and actually still access the valve so I can put those little clips in. So here's how it works here. Going to push down on the spring and install that little clip there that holds the valve on. So that's how it works there. Don't have the proper tool, but works just fine. Here's a look at our cylinder head after we have our new valve springs and retainers and that cleaned up exhaust valve. So she's ready to install. So get ready to install our cylinder head on here. Before we do that, going to push down on that arm for the cam chain guide and tighten up the cam chain tensioner to make sure that arm is below the cylinder head surface. That we can go ahead and slide our head on. Make sure you have all your dowel pins and everything. I have one inside the cylinder head and one there on the new cylinder. So with that, we'll go ahead and slide our cylinder head on. Again, we'll just work that cam chain up through using that little hook tool. We'll give the cylinder head a couple wiggles here to make sure it's around the dowel pins and that it's going to get fully seated all the way down. So just finish pushing that on. Make sure it's seated nice and evenly onto our cylinder. And we are good to go there. I'm going to use this screwdriver here to hold up the cam chain and install the cam chain adjuster through the cylinder head and into the cam chain guide there. So we'll push that through. And I actually need that flathead to adjust this, so I switched out screwdrivers and I'm going to turn that cam chain adjuster to the point where we have the most slack. That way it's easier to install our cam gear and our cam chain onto our cam gear. So we'll make sure we have plenty of slack there. And now I'm going to use this screwdriver to kind of hang cam chain out of the way. And I'm going to use this Permatex assembly lube where we're going to use a good bit of this ultra sticky engine lube to lubricate our camshaft, and we're going to lubricate our camshaft journals as well with that assembly lube. Make sure this is on the lobes and where the camshaft rides. There's our new BBR camshaft. It gets installed with the lobes pointing down. So we'll install it into its little grooves there. And I'm just going to turn it, make sure that it can spin freely and make sure that it spins easily as well. So we'll just double check that and make sure all that feels good. This camshaft doesn't have bearings. It rides on oil film. So that we can go ahead and install our new rocker arms. We can use one of the frame bolts actually to thread into this pin here. And then once you're threaded in, we can pull that pin out just like that. We'll pull it out until the rocker arm drops out. And now we can install our new rocker arms. These come with the BBR kit for that new camshaft. So we'll install our pin back through there, and then we can just unthread that bolt. Like I said, that's one of the frame bolts, so you'll have the correct size after you take the engine off the frame. The other side, we can use a magnet to grab this pin. You look closely, there is a groove there for the bolt that goes through there. So you just want to make sure that will stay lined up as well. We'll drop that rocker arm out and install our new one. So we'll get this lined up here. And once we have it lined up correctly, I can just slide that pin back through. So we'll slide that back in. And again, we want to make sure that groove is lined up so the stud can go through there. So just double check that. And with that, our rocker arms are good, and we can install our whole rocker arm assembly on top of our new cam. So before I install this, I did clean those oil passages, and then I lubricated the rocker arms with that assembly lube. So make sure those passages are clean. It said that cam is oil fed and rides on oil film, so you want to make sure all that's clean and good to go. And now we can install our rocker arm assembly on top of our new cam. So we'll get this slid on just like this. Make sure it's not getting hung up on anything. So our rocker arm assembly is on there now. That we can install our cam gear. So we're just going to put this inside of our cam chain here and slide it onto the cam gear. And again, we'll try to have that dot there lined up at 12 o'clock and slide our cam gear onto our new camshaft. Again, make sure that our flywheel doesn't move, and we'll double check our timing marks. So there's our timing marks on the flywheel and our timing mark on our cam gear. So that is lined up at 12 o'clock and looks good. And there's our timing mark on our flywheel. That looks great as well. So everything is lined up there. This engine is super easy to time, but it's not as easy to get the bolts into the cam gear. I had to make this little tool. So I cut a bolt really short, and then I used my Dremel to cut an X pattern in it. That way I could use a little screwdriver to thread it in. So this worked out pretty good. You will have to probably make something like this to hold the cam gear in time while you turn it to install one of the permanent bolts. But I stuffed a paper towel down in there so I don't lose this little piece of a bolt. And I'm just going to get it lined up here with the threads. Now I can insert that into the cam gear, and I can use a very tiny screwdriver to thread that in. You can't use a full-size screwdriver because it's too big and gets caught up on the cylinder head there, but this little one works great for this. So we'll just get that threaded in, and this will hold our cam gear in time while we turn it to install one of our actual cam gear bolts. So with that threaded in, that'll hold our cam in time. and we can remove this piece of paper towel. We'll get that out of the way. I stuffed a few down in there. And now we can turn our engine over and we can install one of our actual cam gear bolts. So we'll get this threaded in and we'll get that snug down. And now with one of our actual cam gear bolts in there, we can rotate it back and we can remove that temporary bolt that we installed. So more paper towels just in case this thing decides to fall down in there. So we'll remove that, get it unthreaded, and we can thread in our other cam gear bolt. So we'll thread this in. And now we have both of our cam gear bolts installed and we were able to keep our cam gear in time. So we will double check that as well. So get both of those threaded in and we can remove that paper towel. Now we can rotate the cam back to top dead center and we can get ready to double check our timing marks. Before we would do that, we are going to install the washers and the bolts for the rocker arm assembly. So we'll get the bolts installed for this. Just thread them down by hand for now. And then we'll go in that crisscross pattern and just snug these up. We will torque these to spec later on, but for now they just need to be snugged up so we can check our timing marks. So we'll go in that crisscross pattern until these are pretty tight, and we will install that 10mm bolt on the side of the head as well. And we're just going to snug this up for now and we'll torque it to spec later on. So we'll snug that up. And with everything snugged up, we can rotate our engine over here. We'll do 2 full revolutions and then we will double check our timing marks. So we're coming back up around to top dead center here. See that dot up there at 12 o'clock, and all our timing marks are good. So we can torque our bolts to spec. These get torqued to 15 foot-pounds. That works out to be 180 inch-pounds. So I have my torque wrench set to 180. We're going to torque these in a crisscross pattern until we achieve the desired torque spec. So just work our way around until we get to that 180 inch-pound mark. So you can see starting to tighten up here pretty good. It's a little hard with the engine on the bench, but there we go. We got a click out of that one. That one's good. That one's good as well. This one's a little loose, but torqued up good. And we'll double check them all as well. Make sure we get, nice clicks out of the torque wrench. Make sure they're all evenly torqued. So those are good to go. Now we can do the bolt on the side of the cylinder head. I torqued this to 100 inch-pounds. So there's a look at the torque wrench, and then we'll just get this snug down as well. Torque wrench click there. So this is torque to spec. So that is good to go. Now I can set the valve clearance. The intake gets set to 0.002 and the exhaust gets set to 0.003. So I'm just going to grab my feeler gauge here and I've got it to 0.002. That's what I'm going to set both the intake and exhaust valve to. So I'll just insert it between the lash adjuster and the valve and then tighten up the lash adjuster until I feel a good amount of resistance. I'm going to be able to reinsert it, but feel some drag on the feeler gauge there. Then use a needle nose pair of pliers to hold the lash adjuster while I tighten that 9mm nut. And then double check to make sure our lash is still correct. For the exhaust side, it's the same process. Insert the feeler gauge, tighten up the lash adjuster until I feel a good amount of resistance. Then use those needle nose pliers to hold the lash adjuster still and snug down that 9mm nut. Gonna double check, make sure the lash is still good. And now our valve clearance is set. Now I can install the cam plate. So just going to get that bolt threaded in there and get it lined up with the adjuster. I'm going to thread this bolt all the way in until it bottoms out and then back it out a few threads. That way I can adjust the cam adjuster. Using a flathead screwdriver, I can line up that little dot on the adjuster with the dot on the cam plate. So I'll show you that one more time. You can see the cam chain is loose there. And when I turn it all the way to the right, you can see it pull on the cam gear and tighten up the chain. So that took out quite a bit of slack on the cam chain. Now I can snug down that 10mm bolt for the cam set plate. So we'll just snug that down. Doesn't have to be super tight or anything. So going to double check our cam chain slack. To do that, I just feel the cam chain itself and pull on the cam gear and check for slack. Feels good and tight. And I actually didn't have to adjust it any more than this, but if you need to adjust yours, you can do that on the bike. On the valve cover can go, and the two bolts for valve cover. So we'll get those threaded on, and then we'll snug those down with the ratchet. So I also installed a new valve cover gasket on this valve cover as well. And we are good to go and get this engine back on the frame. Just going to tighten up this front engine mount, use my impact gun and a socket and ratchet on the other side to snug those down. Can snug the spark plug down as well and plug the wire back in. Go ahead and install the intake boot with a new gasket as well. So I get those two 8mm bolts threaded back down for the intake boot. So we'll get those on. And then I'll snug both of those up as well. So we'll just tighten those with the 8mm wrench. And then we can go ahead and install our carburetor. So we'll get that slid onto its post and we'll install the two 10mm nuts for the carb. And then we'll snug those down as well with a 10mm wrench. I'm going to go ahead and install our throttle cable. I'm going to spray that off with some carb clean as well, just to make sure it's not dirty. So we'll get the slide installed into the carburetor, and then we can tighten down the cap. So we'll snug that down, reinstall our intake boot for our air box, and we'll snug the clamp down with the Phillips head. We'll make sure that's nice and tight. Now I can reinstall the clutch cable. So I'll get this reconnected, and then I will adjust the cable here. Just going to adjust it in to where it feels good, and then I can use a 12 millimeter wrench and a 14 millimeter wrench to tighten those nuts. With that, I can go ahead and reinstall a new exhaust gasket and reinstall the exhaust. Did paint that heat shield, looks much better now. Go ahead and reinstall the two 10 millimeter nuts for the front and the middle of that mount there as well. So we'll get this hung up just loose for now. Just get all the bolts kind of installed in their place, and then once you have them all in place, you can start tightening up all the bolts. Moving on to the stator side, we're going to get our sprocket reconnected. So we will get that back on its shaft, then reinstall the little locking plate and the two 10 millimeter bolts for that. Going to use the little impact gun here to snug both of those 10 millimeter bolts up. Get them nice and tight. Now I can reinstall the stator cover and all of these 8 millimeter bolts. I left these in the cover so I could, easily reinstall it. We'll just zip these back on with the impact. Be sure not to over tighten these. You can strip them out pretty easily. All right, gonna install our shifter and its 8 millimeter bolt. We'll get that snug down with a ratchet here. So make sure that's nice and tight. And now we can install our fuel tank here and the shrouds, get our fuel line hooked back up. We can get our seat installed and the number plate, and this thing's ready for oil. So I'm going to use a quart of my preferred oil. This is that fancy green oil. I ordered this from the TB website. It's pretty good stuff, and it's going to be great for our fresh rebuild. And this thing is ready for its first start. So here we go. All right, the bike is cooled all the way back down, and I can start it back up. It's on its second heat cycle here, so I can rev it up and you guys can hear what it sounds like. It sounds pretty good with that FMF exhaust and that big bore kit.
What is up, guys? It is a few days later and we're ready to test the XR100 against the stock CRF100 and see what we find. I got my buddy's draggy, so I'm going to be using that for all the info for this comparison. So it should be pretty accurate info. If you know anything about the draggies, they're pretty reliable. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so before we start, the bike has had a few heat cycles on it at this point, and it's ready to, test and ride around like normal. So we did clean it up a little bit as well, and it's ready to go, running good. And we are going to see how this stock CRF compares to the 120cc big bore kit. So let's go ahead and flip the camera around and get into it.
All right, here is his first run on the CRF here. I did want to keep the volume in on this part of the video, but it was super windy and sounded really bad. Filmed this with a GoPro. So this is his run here. That's his 8th mile time right there. And his top speed during the whole run was 48 miles an hour for the CRF.
All right, guys, so the run for the CRF was a 15.39 at 46.71 miles an hour in the 8th mile. This is the flattest ground we could find. It's not, quite a quarter mile, but still good 8th mile data. Now, that time isn't the fastest this bike can run. That's my son launching the bike pretty gentle and just, running through the gears. He's not really dogging this bike or anything, so you can get a faster time out of this. But for our purposes, this is going to work great because it's going to be the same driver going the same route. All we're changing is the bikes, and we'll see what time the XR runs, and then we'll compare the two.
Here is his run on the XR. You can see he launches these bikes the exact same way. So we're basically going to get a direct comparison to what the same driver can achieve on both bikes. And already you can see his top speed is faster than the CRF. So he just touched 50 miles an hour there on the XR. So a bit faster. All right, I'll pull up the time for the XR100. It was 14.64 at 47.9 miles an hour. And the run for the CRF was 15.39 at 46.71 miles an hour. If you do the math on that, that works out to be 3/4 of a second faster for the XR with the big bore kit.
All right, guys, so there you have it. The 120cc big bore kit on the XR100 is quite a big difference when you compare it to the stock CRF100. In my opinion, it is worth the money to spend it on this kit. You'll get a lot of extra life out of your bike, and you'll get a lot more power out of it, and your kit will have a lot more fun, and that's what it's all about. So that's my opinions on this kit. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you found it useful, and I'll catch you in the next video.